Hello everyone, I'm Chaos Cook from Project CliKK, and today I'd like to welcome you all to another episode of CliKK CHAT, where we interview musicians from around the globe about their music experiences and advice. Today, Caitlin Lee and I are here with an exclusive post-concert interview with violinist Randall Goosby, who's just performed Mozart's Third Concerto with the Seattle Symphony brilliantly. We're very grateful to Mr. Goosby for taking his time to conduct this interview with us. So without further ado, we hope you all enjoy watching this video. Thanks for tuning in.
First of all, I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about your performance tonight.
Sure.
So my teachers always told me to focus on the music I'm playing at the moment, and then of course your encore was pretty different in style from your Mozart 3. So
right.
How do you deal with that abrupt change?
That's a great question. Well, it's an encore that I've kind of taken around and played for I don't know, I guess maybe the past year or so. So I'm pretty used to the feeling. It has been an abrupt change from literally any other concerto that I would have played before it. But I think it's refreshing. I think after Mozart, people might expect like Bach or Isai or Paganini or something. So to play something completely new and different that people probably haven't heard and definitely don't expect, is always fun. So I just enjoy the opportunity to, switch gears like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And well, when it comes to playing Mozart, do you prefer it over other composers, or do you just...
Mozart's number one, I think.
Number one?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's anytime someone asks me like, who's your favorite composer, I have to think for a second, but I always go back to Mozart. Ever since I was a kid, he's always been my favorite because, it's in a scary way sometimes. It's really exposed music, but at the same time, it's so simple in a way.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful thing for listeners, especially. It's really accessible music, but also it really demands a lot from the performer. You really have to do something with it. It's not the kind of music that that plays itself. So it gives me an opportunity to use my imagination and have fun.
Yeah. What's your favorite Mozart concerto?
Right now, number 3.
Number 3?
It's usually what I'm playing, because I'll really dive in and I'll pick out all my favorite spots and everything. But usually when I listen to the Third Concerto, it's on an album of someone's with the 4th and 5th, so I'll probably listen to them all the way through. But the third is today. It's my favorite.
Just today. Well, I played the Mozart 3 a while ago, and then I actually played the same cadenza as you did for the first movement.
Oh yeah, the Franco.
Yeah. Do you have any particular reason why you choose a cadenza, or is it just...
that was kind of the one I learned.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess the way that my seasons have kind of gone, I don't have a whole lot of time to learn new music in general. So it's kind of a lot of rehabilitating repertoire and kind of getting it back in my fingers. So the cadenza is kind of in the same boat. But as soon as I do have time, I'd love to learn any of the other ones that are out there. I've tried my hand at writing a little bit, but there's cadenzas out there that are so good already. I would just end up taking things from those. But the little tiny ones in the third movement are original, and I added some stuff in the second movement cadenza also. So
cool.
Yeah.
So in your, I know you have a Roots album, and I listened to it, and it was great.
Thanks.
Do you add certain aspects of improvisation when you play, jazz or blues, or less classical sort of music?
I honestly don't play that much. Even the Perkinson, the encore, that's definitely the most non-classical, I guess, thing that I've played, but it's scored, it's written just like classical music. So it's not like I'm reading off a chart or anything like that. I don't do a whole lot of improv, I guess, except for when I first take the instrument out and I'm warming up. I'll kind of just noodle around and, play some random chords and stuff. I do love blues and jazz, though. A lot of times, one of my favorite records is the Oscar Peterson Trio with Lester Young on saxophone. And I just I kind of have I've listened to it on repeat for years. So every once in a while I'll put it on and I'll just play along with the sax solo. Yeah.
And actually, as a classical pianist, he plays violin and I play piano. And oftentimes I feel like classical music can feel a little competitive, right? Or kind of learning it. I feel like this is I have to perfect it. I can't mess up. So sometimes I like to play these other genres to kind of break away and kind of have a little fun. And I was wondering if that's kind of similar for you, or if there's been stages in your life where you kind of felt similarly about.
Yeah, of course. The tradition of studying and teaching classical music, everybody's preparing themselves to eventually audition, which is essentially a competition, right? And it's an environment where it's really difficult to kind of just be yourself and play the way you want to play, because you're literally being judged by a panel. But I mean, it took me a while to understand that it's the perfection is pointless. You know, like if you're aiming for perfection and you do actually achieve it, that takes an immense amount of focus, right? And that, I think, takes away from the focus on spontaneity and originality and imaginative music making, which I think is the point of what we do. You know, if you wanted to hear something perfect, then just go listen to any recording that exists, because whether or not it's done in one take, especially nowadays, you have editing capabilities, so chances are what you're hearing is probably not like one straight take. For good reason. I mean, if you're going to put something out into the world, you want it to be the absolute best, and you want to, you have the ability to micromanage little things like that. So why not take advantage of that opportunity? But yeah, I don't know. Anytime I'm teaching, whether it's a master class or when I did have a private studio years ago in New York City, my main message to my students was, okay, obviously you want to practice and you want to be as technically proficient as possible, but if it's not coming from a place of what do I want to do with the music, what's the point?
It's gotta come from your heart, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and speaking of like coming from your heart, I've been told to like move when I'm playing, move the violin, like the left arm.
Sure.
Like, because my teachers say that it supposedly helps me with like music making and like spontaneity, like you said. And I noticed that when you play, you move as well sometimes, like bending the knees or leaning to the left side. Do you think it helps with sound production or the aims of achieving a certain sort of tone you want?
No, I don't really believe in movement for the sake of movement. I don't like plan or choreograph any of the movements that I make on stage. It just kind of happens because the music kind of just gets in you. I wouldn't necessarily. The one thing that I will say is holding the violin up helps. Definitely.
Yeah.
If you want to if you want to do anything, louder, softer, if there's a difficult left-hand passage, this opens up, the sides of your body. I mean, if you're doing like this, hopefully you're not crunching over on your right side. It's sort of just it's an expansion of the kind of upper body, which as a violinist, it's really, and probably as a pianist too, it's easy to kind of get into this position, which I think blocks a lot of like energy flow. And they always say, or at least my teachers have always said, the music you should feel, whether it's the rhythm, whether it's the character, you should try to feel that it's coming from as deep a place like in your body physically as possible, and then allow that to make its way out. It never starts from here or from here or from here. Like it's always from your center, like your soul basically. I don't know. Movement for the sake of movement, maybe not, but generally if you're stiff as a board when you're playing, then I don't know. It takes a great deal of physical control to be able to produce all of the various sorts of sounds and colors. I'm not going to look the same way if I'm playing fortissimo as if I'm playing piano or con fuoco or espressivo or something like that. So it just depends on the music.
Yeah, and sound production, I feel like that's something that's a struggle for quite a few musicians that are starting out or progressing through their
old
studies.
musicians too.
Yeah.
It's constant battle.
Definitely for me at least. Yeah,
for sure.
And well, there's a difference, playing in a big hall like Benaroya Hall versus for a recording studio. And I was just wondering, is there like a certain difference you would play with if you wanted to have your sound fill up a large hall compared to a smaller recording studio? Like, would you vary the bow width of the hair or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think piano in a small room versus piano in a big hall is a different thing. It's at the same time sort of freeing, but also a little, it kind of, I don't know, it can make you sort of self-conscious to be recording and have a mic right in front of you. But that does enable you to play really as softly as you want. Sometimes, especially if you're trying to project over an orchestra, pianissimo is probably going to be somewhere between piano and mezzo forte, realistically. unless the orchestra's really good and they can really create that kind of texture for you to float on top of. But I think in terms of actually producing the sound, nothing really changes. I think you just have access to different levels of sound quality, sound volume, obviously. So it just takes some experimentation.
Yeah, and we were actually sitting in the second row today.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and then we were about to leave, and then we saw you had an encore, so we walked all the way back and stood at the back.
Mhm.
And when there's like a performance in a big hall, of course the sound's gonna be different up close
Mhm.
compared to far away. So of course you have to factor that in when you practice, right? So how do you sort of accommodate that?
That's a really good question. I do a lot of like visualization stuff in my practice. So like I'll kind of close my eyes and play something and imagine that I'm listening to myself from the back of the hall, or imagine that I'm like sitting up in one of the boxes and looking down, so that the sound doesn't get trapped in like your sphere, right? You want to try to imagine the sound going. Like I was in my hotel room earlier and imagining that I was like trying to project to that building across the street that I see. Or even farther, trying to project like into space or something. And it sounds really weird, and it's obviously all mental, but when you get to a certain place and you sort of have a certain degree of control and proficiency as far as how you get around the instrument, it is how you think about and how you sort of conceptualize sound in your head that makes the difference. So yeah, visualization practice is really helpful for that. Sometimes I'll try to imagine sending my sound behind me, because we never really think about that, right? Some halls have seats behind, and so if you're thinking about projecting this way, this kind of angle gets lost. And obviously the F-hole's only point one way, the piano lid is angled one way, but I think imagining where your sound is going can do a lot and can open up a lot of possibilities.
And I think something about like practicing and like repetition is it helps because it gets you better at whatever area you're trying to improve. But also I noticed that it can tend to often make you kind of numb to your own playing in a way. Like often you kind of lose that kind of consciousness of how you're playing. And I was wondering, kind of what are your methods, or how do you practice so that you kind of maintain that you stay, is it subjective, objective?
Yeah, I hear your question. You got to practice things different ways. I mean, you can repeat something differently and still get the same kind of benefit in terms of ingraining the physicality of it. But one of Mr. Perlman, who I studied with for years, one of his sort of teaching methods was, say I would play something through and he would kind of ask me how I felt about it. And I would give him very specific things that I felt, or that I felt needed work. And he's more interested in what I was talking about earlier, about just what are you doing? Like, what's the point? What's the point of this music? And so he would just be like, start it again and play it completely differently. Just do something different. He won't tell you anything. He won't tell you what to do. In fact, he would tell you, I don't want to know what it is that you're doing, right? I don't want it to be so obvious, right? That I can say, okay, he's using more bow speed there, more bow pressure, smaller vibrato, or something like that. And I think his goal was just to keep your mind focused on what's possible rather than what you are planning to do. That is, I think, one of the ways in which really repetitive practice can be kind of limiting, is if you do it exactly the same way musically every time. Practice makes permanent, not perfect, right? We're not repeating things so that we can never ever make mistakes. We're repeating things so that it's kind of ingrained in us all of the different ways that it can be done, in addition to trying to figure out how to navigate the instrument physically. So it's something you have to practice. We did the Mozart concerto 3 times, and each time there was something different that happened. Of course you can't plan it. Right. I would never go to a conductor and say, hey, tonight I'm going to do this measure, I'm going to take a little bit of time. Like, that takes the fun out of it.
It's kind of the difference of like performing versus playing. Right?
Absolutely. Yes. And I think that's something you have to practice.
Yeah, and I've noticed that when I practice, especially now, it's because it's recording season. There's a lot of competitions coming up. So like right before the competitions, I start to like get nervous, and then I just start playing like repetitions like mindlessly.
Sure.
Right, and I feel like sometimes it just makes the music worse. Like honestly, like sometimes like I'll have something the way I want it, and then all of a sudden I'll just play it like five or so times, and then the next day when I come back to that passage, it'll be like messed up.
Mm.
So, you know, with that in mind, with, you know, when you're in pressure situations with a lot of pressure, right? Like, you know, you have performances or like a big audition coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice for like tips to practice, like methods?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first of all, I think different people feel different things, and different things happen to different people when it comes to nerves, right? Some people get sweaty hands, some people's like heart rate goes up, some people get short of breath. And so these are things that if you pay close enough attention, you know about yourself. You're prepared for those things to happen. But sometimes that's not enough. And you have to kind of simulate being nervous also, simulate being under pressure in your practice. So for anyone who hasn't heard of it, there's a great blog by a professor at Juilliard, Noah Kageyama. It's called The Bulletproof Musician. And he was a violinist, classically trained, went to Juilliard, and then dealt with really severe like performance anxiety to the point where he just it wasn't fun for him anymore. So he decided to kind of switch gears, and he got a degree in performance psychology, which was a little bit more geared towards like athletics and like maximizing performance, again, in pressure situations. And so he gave us a lot of different exercises in this course that I took with him. For example, like let's say you're one of those people who your breath gets short or your heart gets really beaty when you're nervous. He would tell you to like go run around your house until you get like out of breath and tired and sweaty, and immediately pick up the instrument and play.
Yeah.
And see how you do, you know. And the more you know, you can kind of combine a workout with your practice session, and it's not obviously something that you know that I would recommend doing for an hour at a time or something like that. But another example is like if you get cold or sweaty hands, like run your hands under ice water for a minute and then play, and get used to that feeling of really not being comfortable, so that it's not a surprise when you get into the audition room. Also, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that makes us nervous is self-consciousness. We know that we have people listening, whether it's a jury panel or an audience. And so one of the most valuable tools is practicing performing in front of people, specifically people that make you nervous, like friends, colleagues, people who know what you're playing, and they have a really good sense of what is involved in your performance. So it's different, like, I don't know, playing in front of friends who don't play and don't know anything about classical music than playing with like your violin studio.
Yeah.
You know, invite some of your friends who like you really look up to or something like that, and play for them. You know, and just try to make yourself nervous. Those are things that have really helped. And obviously, you know, I've kind of been performing for a while. I still, you know, in especially big concerts, big halls, big orchestras, can get nervous. But I think one of the things that's helped me is understanding that like nervousness is good. Like that's you caring about what it is that you're about to do. So feed off of that, you know, instead of saying, oh my God, I'm so nervous, like say, oh, I'm so excited. Like I'm excited to get out there and perform. Obviously it's easier said than done, but it's kind of something that, you know, the more you do it, the more you get used to it. But yeah, I think practice is more than just getting things right. You know, it's preparing yourself for whatever it is that might, you know, present itself to you. So creating different environments for yourself is really important.
So you think one of the main goals of practice should be, you know, practice with like a performance in mind, like always practice like you're performing for someone?
Not necessarily. I mean, sure, when you're starting a piece, I don't know if there's much value in trying to learn a piece and also try to figure out how to perform it at the same time. So, you know, there's stages to it, and you can cater, you know, what you practice to what you need, what you're preparing for. You know, if you're just learning a piece to learn it, dive into it, you know, figure out all of the inner workings of it, figure out how it makes you feel, what it means to you. Because until you figure those things out, you can't really practice performing, because those are those are prerequisites to having a really solid foundation on which you can stand when you're performing. But yeah, I mean, it's people get really caught up, especially younger kids and people who are still, you know, in the sort of really developmental stages of learning an instrument, in like the number of hours that you practice. You know, people say, oh, I have to reach 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours a day. That's great if you have the time. Obviously, if you're still learning the instrument, I mean, we're all still learning the instrument, but you know, if you're still figuring things out, really, it's equally, if not more so important, to learn how to practice really efficiently and focused with intention. If you practice 4 hours and the last 2 hours you're just zoned out and mindlessly going through reps, that's not going to stick. you know. But if you practice for 2 hours and you're 100% there and focused the whole time, that's going to be so much more valuable. So figuring out how to get into that space is really helpful. One of the things that helps is taking breaks more. People think, I have to practice 60 minutes straight to call it an hour of practice, right? At this point, I practice for like 30 minutes and then I'll take like a 5 or 10 minute break. Go do something completely removed from music, you know, and then come back to it and you feel refreshed, at least in some regard. You know, some people can go 50 minutes, an hour, and then take a break. But it's about knowing your body and knowing, you know, what's the limit for you before things start to get a little, just mundane and kind of repetitive for no reason.
Yeah, the physical side is definitely important, but you know, like with the mental aspect of things, of course, most people can focus in during their recording sessions or their performances or whatever they have. But for me personally, I think I focus on the wrong things when I'm recording. Like, I always try to focus on the musicality and, you know, the sound production itself. But when I'm in those high pressure situations, I find myself worrying about my, you know, my basic technique, like the intonation, and I don't know, like whatever I've tried, like even if I try to intentionally think about, you know, how to just produce a better sound, it inevitably just goes back to, you know, oh, my left hand's, you know, like it's spazzing out or whatever the case may be. So do you think it's important to, you know, just like keep the left hand in the back of your mind, but also just like consciously think about your musicality and, you know, your musicianship itself?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a difference between thinking about your musicality and your musicianship than thinking about the music. What does this particular moment in this piece mean? You know, what am I trying to communicate here? I think that's at the core of what we do. We're communicators, you know, storytellers. Music is to me, it's the most powerful form of self-expression that we have at our disposal. And so when you're thinking about expressing yourself, if you're talking to someone, for example, you're spilling your heart out. Let's say you had a terrible day or something and you just have to vent. You're not thinking about how you're forming the words.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
It's just coming out. And so I think you have to, you know, you do have to practice that. You know, I think people like to separate technique and musicality. And if you can do that, or if you do that, that's how those things are going to exist in your mind. But I think they have to really be one and the same. You know, the technique is meaningless without that musical purpose.
Right.
The technique has to serve the musicality, not the other way around. You know, when I was younger, I did the same thing. You know, I'd learn the notes first and then try to apply the musicality on top of it, which logically, sure, might make sense. But if you learn a piece strictly from a technical standpoint, again, practice makes permanent. You've learned it already without the musicality, you know, in the mix. And so I think from day one, you know, the minute you open a score and start just learning a piece, you should already start to be thinking about, okay, what's the character here? What's the essence of this music, right? Then the technique won't feel like technique; it'll feel like music. You know what I mean? And so in a performance, it's really hard to just switch from thinking about your left hand, which you're used to doing in the practice room, to suddenly saying, okay, musicality, music. You know, it's an adjustment that's really, really hard to do if you're not kind of conditioned for that. And that's you have the power to change that in the practice room. Specific to the left hand with violin, this is something I found really helpful in practice and in performance. We can't make any sound on the violin without the bow. Have you ever thought about that? You know, like everybody thinks about playing a tune, like it doesn't matter at all where your left hand is if the bow is not there. You know, and our bodies, like, you know, there's an aspect of symmetry to the human body, right? The left and the right hands kind of want to be doing the same things, right? If you're squeezing in the right hand, you're squeezing the left hand, I guarantee it, and vice versa. So if something is freaking you out in the left hand, whether it's a shift or whether it's a really difficult passage, forget about it. Not even keep it in the back of your mind. Forget about it and focus on how the bow is supporting that. What's the bow doing to support and facilitate what the left hand has to do? I had a teacher once, Lori Smuckler, who I also studied with for a time at Juilliard, and I had a big shift, like first to, I don't know, 10th position or something, first to third finger. It was like B flat to B flat, really big shift. And she was like, that doesn't sound good. Like, why doesn't it sound good? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I'm trying to, get the elbow and kind of sequence things properly. And she was like, why don't you feel the shift from first to third finger in your right hand?
Right.
Didn't think about the left hand. I was just feeling, as I was making the shift, I was feeling a little bit of kind of pressure, weight transfer, whatever you want to call it. Done. At least in that one moment. Obviously, you have to practice it, but that idea really stuck with me. If something's really bugging me in the left hand, forget about it and feel like, even if it's a fast passage, try to imagine you're executing that fingering with the right hand.
Right.
This is not like a fixed unit. We have 5 independent fingers, right? So take advantage of it. Don't let it turn into like this kind of claw when you have all of this pliability and flexibility to work with. So those are some things that have helped in terms of kind of left hand technique. Is something every violinist kind of worries about at some point. But I think these are all things that you have to practice into your system in order for them to be accessible in a performance. Just flipping a switch is not easy.
Right.
Athletes, chefs, what I mean, whatever it is, they know what it's going to feel like when they get out there. They're not thinking, okay, well, I've done all my practice. We ran through all the plays. I'm not going to be nervous because I know how it works. Of course they get nervous. These are big moments that they care about, but they've practiced. They've simulated those moments to the point where just because they're nervous, it doesn't really affect them. They're able to kind of just tune it out and focus on the objective. And for us, the objective is making music, communicating.
Yeah. Really.
This is just actually something I was curious about, but because when these composers, like for example Mozart, writes these concertos, we're sure he has something going on in his mind while he's writing, right? And I was wondering, do you kind of personalize kind of the story that? Because what I often do is I would kind of research kind of what was going on in his mind while he was writing this, but it's hard to kind of get into the emotions of what Mozart wrote hundreds of years ago, right? So do you often kind of personalize those the essence, or as you talked about, those aspects of music?
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to, and I don't know of any cases. I'm sure they're out there, but I'm sure they're very few where composers say, okay, in this measure I was thinking about this, in this movement I was thinking about this. You know what I mean? You can kind of get a general sense of what was happening maybe in their lives at that time. For example, the last 3 violin concertos Mozart wrote for another violinist who essentially stole his job. So his in the back of his mind, at least, he was like, okay, let's see what this guy's got, So there's a little bit of that kind of air to it, but at the same time, it's Mozart, these emotions of joy and playfulness and maybe nostalgia, melancholy, whatever it is that you assign to it is correct. Everyone has music that's a beautiful thing about it. It's the most subjective art form that exists. 2 people can hear the same piece and have completely different impressions of it. So it really is about personalizing what it is that you think the composer was trying to communicate. You can't communicate someone else's emotions necessarily. You can interpret them, and once you interpret them, you take them on, and they become yours. And that's what should come out in a performance.
Right. And on a tangent, I know you studied with Mr. Perlman, one of the greatest violinists. And other than what you mentioned earlier about the advice you got from him, did he have any other, pedagogical methods or, just advice in general, just to enhance violin playing?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, he's a super, super funny guy, super down to earth. Doesn't feel at all like you're speaking to, or you're standing in front of an icon in the music world, not just violin, not just classical music, but music, he's the guy. And he just breaks down that wall really fast. He loves to tell jokes, bad jokes. It's some of the jokes are if somebody else were saying it to you, it wouldn't be funny because he's saying it to you and he thinks it's funny. It's really funny. But yeah, I mean, for example, he used to do this thing. This is not necessarily related to a joke, but he would how sometimes music editions will have a preface in the beginning of the thing, and his whole point was trying to get you to understand that what you feel inside and what you feel like you're doing on the instrument isn't necessarily what's being conveyed to the audience. Sometimes it's not enough. You have to exaggerate. So he would like read something and say, "Oh, Mozart was born in whatever," in a totally monotone, boring voice, kind of like how you would just talk to a friend. And then he would be like, "Now you come read it, but read it as if like you're on stage in a theater, to where you really have to articulate and change the way that you speak based on, you know what I mean?"
Yeah.
He was kind of getting you to understand that like the way that you would speak, for example, if you're speaking in front of 500 people, is different than if you're playing for one person. So it was the same thing. If you're playing for him at a lesson, he's like, okay, you're not just playing for me. Eventually, you're gonna be playing for Hall. So it's not just about projecting in terms of volume, right? It's projecting in terms of how varied and how nuanced all of the things are that you're trying to do musically, right? So in terms of articulation, for example, something that might feel really like kind of harsh and aggressive if you're playing a fast stroke or something like that, is probably what's necessary to make it out to a Hall. You know, if you want to play triple piano and you have this really nice floaty airy sound that feels great under your ear, but if you get into a Hall, it won't make it past the 10th row.
Yeah.
You know, so you have to find a balance between, you know, what you feel and what you actually say in performance. And this goes for any instrument, voice, obviously theater as well. So that was really important advice. And it adds to the greatest advice I got from him, which I've already talked about to you guys. I mean, my very first lesson, I was playing like Vinyavsky 2 or something like that. Really tough piece. And he would basically just be like, I was asking him all kinds of questions. How do you execute this shift or this fast spiccato stroke or whatever? And he was like, let me ask you a question. What do you feel about this music? What does this music make you feel? What's the emotion that you're feeling when you play this music? And I didn't have an answer for him. I was like, I didn't really think about it. There's a lot of notes, you know? Yeah. And he was like, well, think about it, and then let's talk about technique, you know? Like that was an eye-opener, and it was something that kind of like pervaded the rest of my studies with him. It was just like, look, music, that's what we're doing here. We're not technicians, right? Like we're doing something that's incredibly intimate and personal. Anybody can nail the shift. Anybody can, you know, have a perfect spiccato or whatever it is. There's physical elements that are required to do it. In terms of making music and doing something that's unique to you, that's the challenge. That's the hard part. That's what separates great musicians from any other musicians, you know. So that was one of the greatest lessons that I got from him.
That's why people kind of say, like, you know, in this world of AI, you know, music's the only thing that, you know, it can't touch.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. For now. Hopefully they don't figure it out. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, I just have one more personal question for you. I'm trying to learn a contemporary piece, or rather, I'm trying to find one right now. Do you have any suggestions for me?
Check out Perkinson.
Perkinson?
I mean, he's not living, obviously, but these pieces were written in like the 70s. Really interesting time in American history, especially for an African-American composer in classical music.
Right.
So there's a lot to delve into. There's a lot to be discovered about him and his life and the times in the U.S. Let me see. In terms of like violin works, it's a good question. I mean, I've done very, very little work and study in contemporary music. I've worked with a couple of composers, not for violin stuff though necessarily. Xavier Foley, a good friend of mine, who's on the Roots album. I don't even know if he's written anything for solo violin. He's got some cool stuff for violin and double bass. He's a double bassist, but yeah, I would check it out. Do some research. My mind has kind of been focused on Black composers in terms of living composers. There's a group called the Blacknificent Seven. You can follow them on Instagram. It's like Carlos Simon, Jesse Montgomery. There's a few other names who I'm just blanking on right now. But it's basically a collective of 7 living Black composers who are always in close touch about stuff they're doing and stuff they're thinking about. Jesse Montgomery has a really, really great Rhapsody for solo violin.
Oh, wow.
Really, really cool piece that I haven't had a chance to learn yet, but I'm hoping that one of these days the schedule will suddenly
Open
up
yeah.
and I'll have the time. I'll have the time to do it. But no, that would be a really, really cool piece for sure.
Yeah. I'll definitely check it out. Yeah.
Yeah, she just won a Grammy too. So
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
big stuff
Yeah.
happening for her.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you
Thank
guys.
you so much
This
for
was
making
a
your
great
time.
interview.
Yeah.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you.
Great advice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. For the musicians, we hope you guys learned some things you can apply to your own musical journey and practices. And for our more casual viewers, we hope you learned some things about Mr. Goosby's musical experiences and preferences. If you'd like to hear more of Mr. Goosby's fantastic playing, check out his album Roots, a celebration of classical music by African American composers. And with that, I hope you have a great day, and don't forget to tune in to our next episode. Thank you all for watching.